The more experienced ones amongst you for sure know one possibility to enhance the LSD calculation in EWM. With this video, I would like to challenge you. I think I found at least one, probably even more possibilities that you were not aware of. My name is Hendrik and this is another video of the series Enhance SAP EWM. A couple of weeks ago, I released a video on this channel where I revealed the approach that the EWM standard uses to calculate the latest starting date. And the content from this video is a precondition for that one here, where I explain how to enhance the LSD calculation. So for those of you who haven't watched that yet, just click the link over here, watch the other video, and then come back to that one here. For those of you who watched the video, you might remember the magic formula that I was talking about. And this is a formula that EWM uses for the calculation. And I looked at the formula again, and most of you probably know the body that you can use to override the standard LSD that is being called when the standard has finished its calculation, and then you can just override the result. And I looked at the formula again and cut it into its pieces and looked at every single component. And with that approach, I found a couple of more options that give you the possibility to implement your project-specific custom logic. And this is basically the agenda for this video. We will look at the different components and then at the end wrap it up and provide an overview about what you can do here. And with that, let us jump into the technical part of this video. So the formula that you see here now is the one that I just mentioned. The LSD is calculated by taking the warehouse order due date as a base and subtracting the sum of the planned execution duration and the planned movement duration. I will not go into detail here. As I said before, this is part of the other video that I mentioned in the introduction. And what we do now is to look at the different options step by step. We are starting with the options to enhance the due date calculation before we look at the options to enhance the planned execution and movements duration. And we will then conclude with what EWM offers to us to override the result of the standard LSD calculation. We will do that while ignoring the options that labor management would offer. So I do assume that we have not activated labor management simply due to the fact that I think most of you have not activated labor management in their systems, and the options that we get with LM being active are a little bit more complex than the one that we have without. So I decided to do a separate video about the LM component at some point in the future, and for now we limit the scope on the options that we have without labor management being active. We will start with the options for the due date calculation enhancements, and those are separated by the decision whether you go for wave management or whether you go without wave management. No matter which way you go, the due date will affect the LSD based on the direction in which you move it. So when you move the due date to an earlier point in time, obviously the LSD will also move to an earlier point in time, because the due date is the base for our calculation here, and from this date we subtract the execution and the movement duration. So an earlier due date means an earlier LSD. And as I said before, you have the option without waves. So in this scenario, the due date is derived from the planned departure from yard, from your delivery, and the only possibility that I found is to use the map-in body and simply override those dates, but I would not recommend to go for that approach. I do think it's not the right thing to change the delivery date simply to have a different due date for the LSD calculation, I think you will have negative side effects while using those dates also for other processes. So while you are not working with waves, I would recommend one of the other options that we will see within the next minutes. When you are working with waves, there is BAdI SCWM X Wave Save. And in this BAdI, you can change the dates and times from the wave header. And the wave header got that from the wave template option. And as you learned in my other video, the pick completion date, if it is filled, is the base for the due date calculation. And if it's not filled, then it might be the peg stage or the wave completion timestamp. And you can change all of them while using this BAdI here.
Sorry to bother you one more time, and again, forgot to remind you about hitting the subscribe button. Please make sure to do so. It will motivate him to create further videos, and you'll be notified about any new releases.
Before we look into the enhancement options for the next component of our formula, I would like to mention again that if you are struggling to follow me from functional perspective, because I touch those points only very briefly, please take a break here, look at the other video where I reveal the standard LSD calculation, and then come back here, which will then give you a much smoother learning experience while having the background knowledge already. So planned execution duration is the next part, and there is one straightforward option which I will explain before we have a look at the formula again. And you should understand that if you are changing the planned execution duration in a way that it takes longer to execute the task, that would also mean that the value that we subtract from the warehouse order due date becomes bigger, which also means that we have an earlier LSD at the end. Makes sense. Increasing the duration for the picking task will push the LSD to an earlier point in time, because you need to start earlier in order to finish then at the due date. The last component of our formula, before we then come to the result and the options to enhance the result, is the plan's movement duration. And in the same way as I explained that for the planned execution duration, if you increase the value of the plan's movement duration, it will lead to an earlier LSD. The value that is subtracted from the due date will become bigger, which will then lead to an earlier LSD. And we do have two options in EWM to calculate the plan's movement duration. The old, let's say, default option, and a little bit newer option that you need to activate in the warehouse number customizing. Again, all those details are also explained in the other video about the latest starting date calculation. And the option 2 is the one which offers a more sophisticated algorithm and also offers options to enhance the standard logic, which you do not have with option 1. So that might be one of the main reasons to go for option 2 at this point here. The BAdI or the BAdIs that EWM offers do both have a fallback class, which is called, in case you do not implement the BAdI with your own implementation, and those fallback classes hold the standard logic to calculate the distance and the time. So in case you want to include your own logic here, it might make sense to use the standard fallback class as a copy template. So copy the class to your own one and then include your own logic. So the first BAdI here, SCWMX TDC start, can be used to include your custom logic to calculate the distance itself, and the second one can be used to calculate the travel time. And this is making use of the distance that you calculated before, and then offers you the possibility to come up with your own logic to calculate the time based on the distance. And as I said, we have a fallback class here calculating the standard way you can then adjust based on your needs. And that closes the part of the video where I look at each component of the LSD formula. And I showed you a way about how to enhance each single component. And now, before we conclude with some party knowledge as usual, we will look at way how to enhance the result of the standard calculation. We will start with the most straightforward option and the body that probably most of you know, which is SAP EWM X RSIC POC WO. And this body is called from function module RSIC WHO create with subroutine call body LSD prio. And the usage is pretty much straightforward. It gives you the result of the standard calculation as the LSD itself, and you can do with it what you want. Overwrite it, change it, move it backwards, move it forward, and that is the easiest option overall to change the LSD calculation. The second one is being called after the standard has created the warehouse order. So the one we saw before is called before the warehouse order with its LSD is saved to the database, and this one here gives you the option to change the LSD of existing warehouse orders. And it is being called when you confirm warehouse task from WOY, and you can then change the LSD of WOX. And this can, for instance, be used to synchronize the completion of warehouse orders. I made an entire video about this scenario and this process, and I will link it for you here in the header of this one. And you can, for example, implement a scenario here or a functionality that lets you update the LSD of all other warehouse orders belonging or referring to the same warehouse request document whenever you start and confirm a task against this warehouse request. And in a scenario where you have, for example, against one delivery, X different warehouse orders in different areas of your warehouse, you always want to make sure that when you start in one area, that the time until the last warehouse order from all the other areas is completed, that this time frame is minimized. And this is something that you can achieve while implementing this body and while updating the LSD of other warehouse orders whenever you start processing the given one. The last option that we have in this context, or the last option that I found to change the LSD of an existing warehouse order, is the API, which is being offered via interface SAP EWM IF API warehouse order. And that interface offers method that you can use to update any kind of warehouse order header data. And you can, for example, make use of class CL API warehouse order with the given method here to update the LSD. Yeah, this kind of closes the main part of the video, but I will not let you go without some party knowledge. You know that from my videos, and so far we found ourselves in the area of, let's say, classical warehouse requests. And what I like to look at, just to conclude here, is the area of production integration and production material requests. Because you can also use the LSD to sort warehouse orders that have been created against production material requests. And there is also an option in standard EWM to enhance the calculation here. And this is what we will look into now. EWM offers two bodies here to include a custom logic, and one of them can be used in the context of single order staging and the other one in the context of cross order staging. Both of them are using the same interface with a method offering a structure where you have the pick completion date as a field, which you can change in your body implementation. And this pick completion date is then later used for the LSD calculation as a due date. So this is the date from which EWM subtracts the planned execution and movement duration. remember the formula that we discussed at the beginning of the video or in the video about the standard LSD calculation. The BAdIs are called from class MFG STP stage, and we have two different methods there for the standard single order staging and cross order staging, and the BAdIs are called from there accordingly. The BAdI for single order staging offers an example implementation, and it is important to note that the example implementation is not called as a fallback. So when you implement pure EWM standard, you will not get an LSD in your warehouse order for production staging. Only in case you implement that BAdI potentially by copying this example implementation, you have the option to set the pick completion date here. And the example implementation that we get for single order staging is making use of the requirement state from the production order, respectively the PMR, and sets this requirement state as the pick completion date. For those of you familiar with PP and the production order, you see here the components of the production order along with their requirement states in ERP and the corresponding date timestamp mapped to the date and time type SCM PREQ in the production material request in EWM. You can implement a similar logic in case you're using cross-order staging, but, and at this point, big shout out to Alice Knorr from Advisio in Prague. Thanks a lot for this valuable hint. When you do that, you need to implement an additional BAdI before in order to provide the reference to the PMR item. Because with cross-order staging, you have kind of a neutral staging warehouse task which are not directly linked to one PMR item. So you first need to set a PMR item as a reference from where you can then read the requirement state. The last graphic of the last section of this tutorial was my proof of work and the realization that it is indeed possible to set an LSD for a warehouse order which has been created against the production material request. And with that, I would like to close this video. I do hope that the statement that I made at the beginning of this video was right, where I mentioned that I found options to enhance the standard LSD calculation that you did not find before. I also hope that in case you are aware of an option that I did not mention here, that you write that into the comments so that the audience and myself can benefit from your knowledge also. Apart from that, make sure you check the corresponding blog post. As you know, you will find all the technical objects that I mentioned here on my website and the corresponding post. And make sure that you hit the subscribe button so that you do not miss the next video on my channel. Happy learning, everybody!